Today we'll be discussing how to onboard our Auto API license. You will go to the Asset Management tab in Sentinel, you'll go to Add Asset, and then Add API. Over here on the right, you're able to see how many API licenses that you have, in this case 3. That's already auto-filled here under the service level. So you'll first give the asset a name, whatever you want to call it. You can change that at any point in the future if you need to. Then you'll provide the primary hostname URL, and you put that here. Make it as complete as you need to be in order for us to access the API properly. Then choose the industry, whichever best fits the purpose of the API here. Again, this is changeable. And then at the bottom, this is all optional configurable items. Firstly, if your API is internal, you're going to want to mark internal asset. Now, when I say internal, I mean it needs a VM in order for us to access it. So if that's true, you should have already set up your VM, and then you'll choose the VM that you want to use to scan with. Then you'll only need to provide the IP address for the API site if you're not able to set up DNS. But if you've set up DNS resolution on the VM, we don't need this, and you can just put in a placeholder. But assuming it's not an internal API, meaning it doesn't require VM, you're just going to leave that unchecked. For the custom asset ID, this is just if your organization has a way to identify that particular asset, then you can go ahead and put that there if that's going to help you. You can also set an asset priority. By default, it's on none, but you can set it from 1 to 10. Just be aware that this will change WhiteHat's default ratings for findings. So only raise it up or lower it down or set any priority really if you are okay and want our default finding ratings to be changed. The scan speed, right now it's on default very fast and limited requests per second. But what we would consider a bit safer to do would be medium, 4 requests per second. We find this very rarely has any negative consequences on our client servers. But if you want to keep it on very fast or unlimited, go ahead, or you can also put it to 8 requests per second. Or if you're worried about us impacting your server, you can slow it down to 2 requests per second or 1 request per second. This is not tied in. You can change this at a later date if you need to. Then if you want to add an internal description, you can also go ahead and do so there if that helps you. And then the next step is a scan schedule. So you can set it to continuous, or nights 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. and weekends 24 hours. Or if you're not ready to start scanning, you can set it to never scan. Keep in mind that after this step, you will need to add configurations or documentation, so you might want to start with never scan. Be aware that by default it is set to continuous, so if you don't want it to start scanning or you just don't want continuous, you're going to need to remember to change this in the second step. Also, don't forget to set the time zone and hit create. Once it's created, you'll be taken back to the Asset Management tab, and you should see the asset you just created here. Then in order to configure your APIs, what you'll do is you'll click on the name of the asset. And first, just to go through the rest of the configuration tabs, where you'll land is on the Scan tab. So you'll be able to see is the scan running or not under the scan status, how many scans have completed in the last 30 days, when is the next scan scheduled to run, the maximum scan speed that you currently have set, the last completed scan date and time, and then the endpoint information, so the endpoints that were included in the last completed scan. This is searchable, as well as how many open verified vulnerabilities we have at the bottom. If you need to either set or change the scan schedule, you'll click on Scan Schedule. Not scheduled stopped is exactly how it sounds. We're not going to be scanning. Continuous means we'll run from A to Z without stopping. We'll most likely pause for a few hours if it's a shorter scan and then pick back up and go on our merry way and scan again. Or nights 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. and weekends 24 hours is exactly how that sounds as well. And then customize option. So we recommend scanning 40 hours a week if at all possible. It's divided between days of the week and AM and PM. The key thing to remember is that if the hour is in blue, it will scan, and if the hour is not in blue, it will not scan. You're also going to want to give the custom schedule a name. And don't forget to set the time zone for really any scan schedule, but particularly for the custom schedule or the nights and weekends, so it's running when you would actually expect. Also, while not as intuitive to press scan schedule and change the schedule, in order to change the maximum scan speed, you'll also be clicking on Scan Schedule, and this is where you can adjust it as previously discussed a few moments ago. Any changes, hit Add. The Scan Now button is just if you need to kick off a quick scan outside of your normally scheduled runtime, and that'll just kick off a scan, as I said. The Overview tab is just the general information for your asset. So what you'll see is the name of the API, the primary host name, our WhiteHat asset ID, if you've set a custom asset ID, the asset owner, which by default will be whoever onboarded the asset, but if you need to change that, you can do so. The asset status, asset phase, if you've set it, your name, the industry, if you've set a description for the API, the service level. If it's an appliance, if you use an appliance of VM, then that information will be here. And then users with access, the time zone, service renewal date, etc. So if you need to change any of this, you're going to hit Edit. And you can see here what you can and can't edit, such as the asset status, asset phase, etc. Any changes, just hit Save. If you need to delete the asset, you can go ahead and do so here. Just be aware that you will lose all finding data, so make sure to pull any reports you want to before deleting it. Also, please note that if you delete this asset, you will not get the license back. So if it's a situation where we need to swap or do anything like that, you're going to need to reach out to your CSM or technical support team. So now we have the API configurations. And this is where you'll configure everything that we're actually going to scan. So firstly, what we recommend is if it's possible, you're going to want to upload your documentation, so your API definition. So right now we support JSON or YAML, Open API 3.0 or Swagger 2.0 compliant file. We also are going to be supporting Postman. More details will be added to Sentinel as soon as that's official. And you can choose to merge the endpoints, add the endpoints, overwrite the endpoints. And then once you've dragged and dropped your file, then you can click Upload. And then you should see all the endpoints appear. Now, if you need to do it individually and just add endpoint by endpoint, you'll choose Add Endpoints and Individual. And then what you'll do here, over here on the right, is you will add, now this is optional, a summary, description, and operation ID. You don't have to put anything here if you don't need to or if you don't want to, but just so you can keep track of things you might want to, which, what kind of endpoint, what is it for, etc. What you do need to add though is the method. So is it get, put, post, delete, options, head, patch, or trace? We already have the base domain listed here for you, and then you'll just need to add the rest of the file path that points to the endpoint here. Then here, what you'll see is parameters. So you can either add a parameter, or if there's no parameters required, you can leave that blank. You'll want to put the name of the parameter here, and then you'll want to specify where is that parameter. Is it in the query, header, path, or cookie? Now, you don't have to put in a default value, although we do recommend it. It's much easier for us to get a successful request if you actually put in what the API endpoint is actually expecting, the value it's expecting to get. So if you don't add it, we'll add our own default ones, but again, it's better if you can possibly do so to add the proper values that it's expecting. You can also add a description if you want. If you ever need to delete any parameters, you can go ahead and hit the delete button. Then we have the request body. So you'll see this automatically filled out if you've added your API definition. But if you need to add any yourself, you're most likely going to only add this if you actually need to add content type. So you'll set the required to true. Again, the description is optional, so you can put it there if you'd like. And then you'll hit add content type. And then you can choose application JSON, application XML, application XWWW form, you're all encoded. And then you'll just need to put in the proper default value in the proper format that it's expecting. So if you're choosing JSON, make sure to put in a JSON format, etc. And you can add several different content types if you need to. And then responses, if there's any responses in your API definition, we'll put those there so we know what to expect. If not, it'll just be some default values. But you can see if it's there, that's what we'll be using. Over here on the left, you can see how you can basically tell our scanner what you do and don't want us to include. So if you are using a definition, for instance, but you don't want us to scan all of the endpoints, you can disable them. So if it's blue, we'll be scanning it, whereas if it's grayed out, we're not going to be scanning it unless you enable it. So notice that if you try to enable put or post, anything that would not necessarily by default be production safe, you're going to want to make sure that it's not going to do anything bad if we're sending that request. So in order to enable it, you'll press that. It'll give you a warning that it's unsafe, and that is again just so you can be aware of and double check that it's not going to have any negative consequences if we send that request, especially in an automated fashion. Then you'd hit confirm. If you want to save first, obviously each endpoint, and you're going to want to test it. So you can put test here, and then at the bottom, you'll see the request that we sent, and you'll have a response. But you also might need authentication. So if your asset requires authentication, you're going to want to go over to authentication. So we have custom header options here, and you can click edit, and you can edit any of these values if you need to. You can delete any of these values if they're not needed, or you can add your own custom header. So make sure to put the name of it, and then the value that your API is expecting, and then hit save. And then for authentication, obviously, if there's no authentication required, you could just leave that alone. But if there is, we have two options. So if you click add, you can either choose API key or OAuth. So for API key, you'll choose the location, so either the header or the query parameter. Then you'll put in the name of the header or query parameter, and then the API key, and hit save. If you need OAuth, then you'll choose OAuth. You'll put in the target URL. You'll choose the format is JSON or form encoded. The authorization flow is either going to be client credentials, in which case you'll put in the scope, client ID, client secret, or if it's the resource owner, same as above, but also the username and the password. And then you'll choose what operation we can use to check to make sure we are actually authenticated. So you'll just see a list of the currently onboarded API endpoints that you have entered, and just choose whichever one will basically let our scanner know that yes, we're definitely authenticated. And then hit save. And then again, that's pretty much it. You can enable and disable as you need to, add, edit any endpoints or the API definition. So if you have any questions, please reach out to your CSM or our technical support team.